Okay, so thanks to our terrific presenters today, and thanks to all of those who are connected, my name is Matteo Winkler, and here with me it's my partner in crime or co-conspirator. I have read today a new term, Marcella Liberté. Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer here at HEC Paris. Marcel, you want to say a couple of words?
And again, thank you and welcome everyone to this second session of the DEI Symposium. We also wanted to thank our colleagues throughout the different business schools through the EDI forum that also helps give visibility and make the call for papers as rich as it was. We had a hard time making our final decision, but we know from the feedback that we got from the first session, it was very enriching, and we certainly look forward to the second part.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Marcel. So, as you know, the idea behind this virtual symposium is to set the tone about the changes, the policy shifts in DEI, in diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in the US and globally. So today we have 7 speakers. This is the second session. After the session, we will make sure with the IT service that both sessions will be made available to the public in some social media platforms so that we spread the fact that there is a community of scholars and independent researchers who are working on this issue. And so this is we are really pioneering within a field that is pretty new and important in this current geopolitical setting. So you see here the list of our fantastic speakers today. We will move around a little bit, a couple of speakers. We will start with Angela Sutan. Please, I will stop sharing my screen so you can all see. Wait a second. So Angela, you can start.
First you need to show
yours. 1 second. I will need to quit because I have so many windows open.
For our audience and attendees, we invite questions in the chat function, so don't hesitate, and we will try to address a few with our speakers after they've done their presentation to be able to engage and gain insight through their work and your questions. So thank you on that front too.
Okay, so you could now see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so hello everybody. I hope everybody is well attentive. I mean, I'm the first, I'm lucky. I only have 44 slides. Matteo, don't be worried. I will show them all. Okay, so I will try to go up to the point. I'm an experimentalist, okay, and I will show you some experiments that we conducted in which I can show you that you can do very tiny modifications in the structure of the recruiting market, and by consequence, you will be able, for example, to recruit more of a minority. Here in my experiments, you will see I talk about women, but you can replace that minority with whatever, and I'm only showing you as an example. Okay, so as I told you, so I'm an experimentalist. In case you're not familiar with this type of methodology, we always say that we do better than stated behavior because we do real behavior. For sure is real behavior in the lab here in this thing, but still people do take incentivized decision. So we run those performance-based experiments in which they take decisions and they are incentivized. and we do not deceive people in the experiment. I tell you this in the beginning. To start, I want to show you some good news. In France, everything is going well. As you can see, we have not only more and more women on boards, for example, but we also have laws. And as you may know, a couple of years ago, even the Bourse de Paris had for the first time a woman elected, nominated. And that day, the French press introduced her to everybody. This is the picture that they decided to choose that day, to introduce her to the market. As you can see, she's not sitting on a couch, she's sitting over the couch, because for sure it's much more inspiring for a woman just to look at the way the same French media introduced the guy who was there before her. Okay, so I'm just showing you this to see that we are still into this kind of representative stereotyped image of women. Okay, so let me show you our first experiment. Imagine that you're a board maker, so you need to choose 11 administrators on your board. 11 is the average size of the board in Europe. And you have several criteria upon which you need to choose those individuals, and you operate in two conditions. One condition in which you just do what you have to do, okay, and one condition in which you need to follow what is called the common knowledge rule. It means that you need to do your choices as close as what do you think the other choices are. Okay, so common knowledge, no common knowledge. So no common knowledge is basically those are your independent choices. Common knowledge is you try to do as the others. On the screen you see that when you try to do as the others, you do worse for the women. Okay, so this is my my result. And if you want to look more into detail, if you look one by one at the administrators that you recruit, you see this amazing trend that at the beginning you recruit a man, and after you recruit another man, and you recruit another man, and by the third you finally remember that you also have to recruit some women, and after you remember that you need to recruit some women, and this is when you are reminded that you need to do as the other. So my first recommendation here is very simple. Do not recruit by telling people respect the quotas, or do as the others. Let people recruit based on their beliefs. Okay, so this is first recommendation from the first experiment. I'm for sure available to give you info about the experiment if you want. Second experiment is can I transmit some implicit information without only giving data to people. I'm showing you what is called a data physicalization experiment, in which you can have a walk among the data. Basically, you see a group of people, you walk inside. Those are augmented reality people, that you can move around and you can see if they are tall, if they are small, etc., etc. Imagine you need to recruit someone among them. When you recruit them, those people will be in your team, okay? And you need to choose them. Imagine that those people, if you want to learn something about them, you just have to click to discover some attributes, like, for example, self-esteem or how much they trust the others, okay? Those informations are there and you discover them only if you want, okay? So this is what is called data physicalization. If you look at this, you will recruit more women if you let people discover attributes about giving, okay, which is coherent to being stereotypically a woman, okay? And if you look at people who deselect women from boards, who do you put out first? Basically, if women are related to job that is related, for example, to CSR, they will be less pushed out than the men. Okay, this is what I'm having on those graphs. So second modification, systemic modification that I can tell you, highlight the purpose and the congruent attribute and make it implicit. Okay, so this is the second attribute. And now the third one that I want to give you, imagine that you have a recruitment process in which people have, like, for example, two attributes, like that would be the gender and the skill on one specific topic. If you make this recruitment people by seeing people one by one, you see, you know, for example, the gender and the skill for one person, and after the gender and the skill for another person. But if you see all those people together, you have much more combinations here. This is called the bracketing effect. Like, for example, imagine I want to hire people from this group on 3 jobs. This is what is called collective hiring. Or I want to hire people and I only hire people from one specific pool, very small, okay, for specific jobs. We conducted an experiment in which people were doing this kind of task, you know, that we can call artistic or mathematics, and we looked at what happened if people were in a narrow or a broad bracketing. Narrow meaning that you could have access to people one by one, and I'm showing you just one result here. Basically, we looked if people were benefiting from diversity training or not, and people are doing exactly the same. If you look at the bottom of my slide, they are doing exactly the same by discovering what other skills the other people do. But one important thing is that if you switch to broad bracketing, you do not need diversity training, because people will pay more attention to the other to the composition of the team that they are selecting, because they are selecting people as a whole. So I'm having here the last recommendation. If you want to compensate for diversity training, because you cannot do diversity training anymore, do large bracketing recruitment. You will be able to select more women at the end. And I think I'm done in 10 minutes, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angela. It was really great. You still have a few minutes left. I think you have 3 minutes left.
I would be happy to take a question. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Any comments from the other speakers or the people attending? Erica?
Oh,
Yes.
thank you very much, Angela. This was absolutely fascinating. I just had a practical question. You mentioned adding implicit information. How would one go about doing that in the recruitment process? And by bracketing, again, I was a little unclear on what you meant. Do you mean do a broader search for multiple, just do you increase the number of qualifications listed in the
Yeah.
app?
Okay, so thank you for the question. So for the second question, what you do is that basically if you have 3 jobs, you just do all your interviews the same day with all the candidates for the 3 jobs. So, and with the same people participating to all the recruitments, at least part of the committee. So you have access to a large pool of applicants. And in that case, what will be salient to you without having someone to point at will be the gender, because this is something that everybody will implicitly send you. You know, you will see, because there are numerous people, implicitly you will pay attention to the gender and you will recruit more women. So this is for the second question. And for the first question, so basically we conducted this lab experiment in which it was easy to transmit implicit information, okay, because we were putting the information in the body of the person, okay. So it was just a way to test if the information is there, will you pay attention to it, okay. In the real life now, for sure, when you do recruitment, it's completely counterintuitive. You know, there have been a lot of work saying that you need to do blind recruiting, you know, so not to put the picture on the CV or something. Basically what we are saying exactly the opposite. Still put the picture on the CV, because this will transmit the implicit information. You know, you don't need to say I'm a woman, you know, but you will be a woman, and if people are doing large bracketing, but only in that condition, okay, people will pay attention that you are a woman, and you will be more on the top of the pile than the other. But in order for this to work, people need to do large bracketing, right? And not just look at the CV one by one.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Any other question or comment, even from the Q&A? I don't see anyone. Okay. Yes, Abigail.
What about if there are tools used for shortlisting, which may be discriminatory? Yeah, for sure. If you shortlist, whatever I said before doesn't hold anymore, for sure. Yeah, this is why I'm advocating for large recruitment processes. Yeah. Is basically difficult to implement in practice because people in most companies you have this pressure, when there is a job to be fulfilled, to fulfill it immediately. You cannot wait for the second job to be fulfilled. So it's not something easy that I say this, but yeah, this is so. No, this we just finished the experiments, and we hope to publish it soon enough. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
So those
Angela.
are, by the way, Erika, those are three different papers, in fact. Yeah. So
Yeah, we look forward to reading them.
See with the data collected.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, very good. So the next speaker is Vincent Mak. Angela, I will ask you to stop sharing your screen, please. Thank you. Vincent, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And yeah, can you all see the screen, what I'm sharing, right? And my voice is okay, right? So thank you very much. So thank you very much, Marcel and also Matteo, for organizing this. Last week's session was already very, very inspiring, and I'm glad to be able to share some of my work in this session as well, and to hear our other researchers' work. So this is actually, let me do the presentation myself. So this is actually a joint work with two other colleagues in Berlin and Hilbert, respectively. So I think the point of this, in the bigger scheme of things, of this research is to basically just very simply just try to nail down one simple thing. So that is, to put it in one line. As an employer or as the leadership of an organization, telling your employees that if you aspire to DEI goals, can make your employees nicer to you. But however, you cannot do it in a too flowery way. You can only do it in a modest enough way, because if you really go too far, then people will start developing a kind of backlash on you. And this research is, well, I mean, just one paper, not three. This research is mainly to use a series of field experimental evidence to actually try to support this point in a context of gig workers. So why gig workers? And here, let me get started. So why? Because first of all, it is really a developing mode in the labor market. And this is all about, gig working is all about short-term contract and mostly online communication, if not completely online work. And there is a development trend of it, especially after COVID, as I think we all know. And, some of the characteristics of gig working. And the most important thing among these characteristics that we would like to focus on is that, I mean, if they are so sort of, let's say, arm's length review, and also so short-term in terms of their employment review and or online. And also, by the way, yeah, a lot of gig workers have traditional employments at the same time. I mean, how to motivate them to really work for the company, work for you as a gig worker. So how to motivate them, even when they are on short-term contract, you would like them to work hard, or at least to also sometimes not mind working a little bit more than what you pay them, just to be more, let's say, pumped up in terms of their work for you. And this is especially important as a lot of startups actually employ gig working. So we try to focus on this and try to see whether a communication of the employers' two types of goals, okay, would be able to motivate gig workers in terms of their positional motivation, that is, their motivation to do extra work, a little bit of extra tasks for the organization as our dependent variable. How communication of different types of goals can really motivate them to be nicer to the organization, so to speak. And we especially look at two types of goals. One, the normal business kind of goals, like, we aim to increase our profit, we aim to work more with our business partners, that sort of thing, as a kind of reference point. And the other types are the purpose-driven goals, like DEI goals. So how just the mere communication of such goals in the communication with these gig workers can actually get them to be more pro-social toward the organization. So, and how might either of them compare with each other, first of all, and also to compare with just not communicating any goals with them. So as I will show in one of our field experiments. Now, the theory behind is that if we communicate goals about our companies to gig workers, the point is that in the classic goal setting theory, communicating goals actually can turn people's attention towards you, could turn the gig workers in this context attention towards the organization, and hopefully that can actually motivate them to work harder or to not mind working a little bit of extra work for your company. So this is, let's say, our theoretical premise in a nutshell for the first research question. And secondly, we want to also look at, if communicating DEI goals can actually help to motivate gig workers, would this have an additional effect over communicating business goals? That is, compared with just communicating business goals with them, let's say, just as I said, improving profit, for example. If in addition to that, we also talk about DEI goals, would that have an even better effect on them? Well, our sort of theoretical sort of lens is that, communicating too many goals may not be useful. So, communicating each of them may be good, but together may not necessarily produce additional effects, because that may lead to a bit of cognitive overload. Too many things, especially these gig workers, are kind of like, they are not especially keen on putting a lot of attention to you anyway. Okay. Now, even more importantly, we also want to look at the case where DEI goal communication, which would be especially pertinent to this particular gathering, when may this kind of goal communication backfire? Okay. Now, what we postulate is that if we kind of, make it too high level, then that may be backfiring. For example, if we talk about SDG goals, the United Nations SDG goals, as part of our organization's DEI goals, that sounds really a little bit far-fetched, right? This sounds like we talk about something very high up, and then we hope that they would be hoped and they would be motivated. Well, that could only lead to a sense of, oh, we are really, let's say, really, really far from that kind of world-level goals. So what are you doing? So therefore, this can lead to a demotivating effect instead. So across the 3 field experiments that I am going to introduce, we hope to answer each of these research questions. And and let me just start. Okay, so the online field experiments that we do is actually in collaboration with a precision medicine startup that actually involves one of the co-authors. So the precision medicine startup basically is involved in R&D sort of things on precision medicine, which is to make sure that the treatment for each particular patient is particularly customized to their, for example, genetic and other makeups. So, but in the context of this this set of studies, what we do is simply that under this rubric of the precision medicine startup, we hire gig workers, and we ask them to do some data exploration tasks to get them involved as employed gig workers. Okay, searching for information in the database, and then after this task that we ask them to do, which is quite customary in all these cases, we give them a goal communication message, which can be, as I said, communicating the business goals. We want to improve our partnerships with other organizations like hospitals, etc. Okay, or the goal communication. So we try out well. And then after the communication, we actually request them to do some pro bono sort of extra work. Let's say, would you mind doing a little bit of extra data exploration for us? That sort of thing. Okay. And then we try to see what happens. If it's goal communication, would that actually increase the rate of replying positively to do pro bono work, for example? So the communication of the business goals consists of, for example, this. Before continuing, we would like to tell you about our organizational goals, that is improving the personalized healthcare solutions, etc., strengthening partnerships. Now, for the DEI goal communications, it's a little bit longer because we kind of try to give a snapshot of the basic definition of DEI according to some authority, and then stating the DEI goals as, for example, a welcoming recruitment policy, equitable pay among employees, for inclusive work environment for all employees. So we try out two different types of goals and see whether we manage to improve the, the pro-social willingness to work a little bit of extra work for us among the gateway. It turns out that indeed, in study one, where we compare no goals versus communicating the business goals like partnership, okay, and also communicating DI goals separately. In both cases, actually, we managed to find that there is a significant increase in the proportion of gig workers willing to help us on extra work. Therefore, the basic premise seems to work, okay? And we also did another study where we use the business goal communication as a baseline, and however, it is compared against a condition where we communicate both business and DI goals together. Now, you might think there should be, a synergy, right? But as I said, well, I mean, for these gig workers, maybe communicating too many goals may just be a little bit not going to, to say the least, not going to really have any marginal impact because there may be a little bit of cognitive overload. And in fact, you see that there is no improvement. If anything, there is a slight decrease even in the motivation. Well, it's not significant, but at least it is not certainly not there. Okay. And so these are the two studies that establish some of the basic findings. Now, also in these two studies, we also collect some of the test responses from participants who are invited to write down. So you have just decided whether you want to help us on this issue work. So could you tell us the reason behind your decisions? And then we use this software package, LIWC, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, to analyze the test of the decision reasons. So we actually focus on one of the major summary measures of LIWC as defined by this latest package, or latest interpretation document of LIWC, the LIWC 22, and which is called Cloud. Now, previously, Cloud is used to test social status. Well, but in this case, it is not very applicable. But however, Cloud actually also is a summary measure that could also detect for us the use of other focus words like, okay? And therefore, the evidence, as we have found out in terms of the mediation, is that the evidence is consistent with the positive impact of goals due to shift of attention. That is, we found out that for those people who say, yes, we would like to help you on more, especially among the conditions where we do communicate these goals to them, they just use more other focus words like you or we. That is, the goal communication managed to turn their focus towards more like the you or we rather than I, the organization itself. So this is some more evidence, and we do some mediation analysis that I'm not going to bore you with, that show that this really helps to, help us understand why that sort of increased motivation happens. Now, finally, in study 3, we use more, elaborate kind of communication of DI goals that include, as I have said, the UN SDG goals. We named the goals 5, 10, and 8 there, basically just to, so to speak, pump it all up. Let's say, oh, we are going to, resonate with this, and then we talk about our own DI goals. Now, that has proven to be actually counterproductive. If you can see here, the enhanced DI goals actually leads to a lower response rate of agreeing to help than the business goals condition. So again, we use the basic business goal condition like improving partnership as the baseline, and we show that enhanced DI goals, in contrast with, for example, in study 1, with a more modestly framed and more internally framed DI goals, actually is going to be counterproductive. And so, and this is really consistent of this psychological theory about goal motivation, about distant goals not necessarily making people work harder. So these are basically our findings. And this slide is just to show you that we also look at the amount of work those people actually did in the extra tasks, and we show similar results basically. So yeah. So the conclusions are that DEI business and DEI goal communications can indeed promote gig workers' positional behavior towards organization in terms of, working on actual work for the organization. The two have similar effects if they are each done, independently. But if you add them together, well, I mean, the two of them certainly do not have any marginal improvement over just communicating the usual kind of business goals. Now, this is all channeled by a shift of attention toward the organization. That is, you make gig workers focus on you more, and this is in line with goal setting fees. And finally, if you give people an enriched DEI goal communication, pump it all up to SDG goals, well, this is not going to be necessarily work. This may even backfire. So we have some implications, of course, in terms of the goal communications, and perhaps not just for gig workers, but also for more traditional employees as well. And this is what we have found so far. And I hope I haven't gone above 10 minutes yet. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Vincent. Very, very interesting and very disciplined. 1 minute extra, but it was worth it to listen to your conclusions. So anyone wants to react quickly before we pass to the next speaker? Yes, Erica?
Hi, Vincent, this was fascinating. I wanted you to clarify a bit more what tips into having too much DEI information. So in case one, it seemed you were doing business goals distinct from DEI goals, and both of those seemed high. The middle condition, which seems satisfactory, and then the backfiring. So how is diversity presented in condition one or study one different than the way that it's presented in two, other than giving them more information about the motivation behind doing diversity in and of itself or for itself? Can you explain a bit more about if I'm designing something, when do I know that I've gone too far?
So, for example, in this case, I think this is what we did in study 3. That is the one where it goes too far. So, and this really includes everything. So, for study 1, for example, we just have the highlighted bit. You can see what I'm highlighting, right? So we just talk about within our company, we do this fair career pursuits, etc. But what happens in study 3 that really differs and makes the difference is this. So I think what happens is that we talk about this really rather, let's say, far from, very high level sort of goals, UN SDG goals. And our sort of theoretical postulation is that these goals are really so far off that you feel as a gig workers, you feel, I'm just doing some search on a database for you. Why are you talking about world peace to me? So therefore, they feel we are very, very far from world peace.
So that to me, I wouldn't say is going too far. I mean, it's going too distant and too relevant to the particular condition. But if I were to say that if you drive through these neighborhoods and don't pick people up, they can't have access to groceries, like you're participating in persuasion of inequality, is that more persuasive?
Definitely. So indeed, distant is a much better word. So indeed, that's also the word we should use. So these are two distant kind of goals. So let's say if we in addition to these internal corporate goals, if we say, oh, I mean, we'll help the neighborhood, recycle the food, for example, whatever. So then that may actually not have a backfiring effect. So we try to create a condition that really could be so contrasting that we can really see what might be happening if you really go too distant, as you say. So yes.
Back to condition 1, because in condition 1, so it's not that I need to hide diversity training. So if one is in an institution where it's not, people aren't afraid of it, isn't that I just have to say, we have university goals and our university goals are these things. I could say, these are the university goals. This is what diversity and equity and inclusion do. These are how these two frameworks are compatible. And that won't be too far.
I think that won't be too far because you are still sort of talking about what you in your organization wants to do. So therefore, I would say that is really, kind of, we cannot try everything here, right? But that is still qualitatively consistent with this year. So because this is a startup, but if it had been a university, then talk about within the university, we would like to do this for DEI goals. I think these are completely, practical and certainly not distant at all. Yeah, so I think this would work in this case.
We see that we have another question in the chat, Vincent, from Michael, that says, do you examine the nationality and cultural backgrounds of the gig workers? Because we know that through prior research and the cultural value systems that can play out, language elements also have an effect. And so was this considered a part of your analysis?
That is a very good question. So when in our analysis, we did one regression against demographic variables. So I think in some cases, we did have an effect of gender. So females are just more motivated. Yeah. So, however, I think within our participants, I think they are mostly from the West. So I don't think a test in cultural background would be very effective here. So I think they are mostly from the West. They are participants mostly from the West and paid in GBP. I haven't explored their cultural background, but I don't think it can really lead to a lot of statistically significant evidence yet. But thanks. But this is a good question.
It's a good question. Thank you. Well, thank you for that, Vincent, and thank you for the questions from the audience. I think we'll now shift to our third speaker, and I may have mispronounced it, Shreya, if you're ready. Shreya is going to share with us the intersectional positioning of the uneven terrain of organizational DEI. So diversity networks of negotiators of change. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marcel. Can you all see my screen and hear me well? Okay, great. So yeah, thank you so much again, Marcel and Mateo, for organizing this session today and also, allowing me to be a part of this discussion. Today I will be presenting to you one of my papers, which is part of my PhD thesis. So I haven't submitted my PhD yet. I will submit it in September. So this is, an idea I've been working on, and I thought this would be a really good platform to share it because I think it's also relevant to the topic of this wider symposium. So sort of to start off with, what are diversity networks? So these are like staff networks or employee resource groups in organizations, which are formed based on a shared sense of identity. For example, it can be a network for women, for LGBT plus employees, or people from racial minorities. And these are very common in the workplace today as part of diversity and inclusion initiatives. And from a critical diversity perspective, which is also my positionality, these networks are seen as change agents in organization. And that very much dates back to the historical roots of these networks. So one of the first networks that could be traced from the literature is like the Black Employees Network at Xerox in the US. And they played a really pivotal role during the civil rights movement, where they sort of advocated for better working conditions for Black employees, and also they fought against discrimination. So they have a history which dates back to issues of advancing social justice. And critical management scholars believe that even though these networks are now part of organizational diversity and inclusion initiatives, and to some extent can be considered co-opted to like HRM initiatives, they do have the potential to be change agents because they can come together as a collective and act as internal pressure groups. So in this paper, I specifically look at their ability to create change against the wider organizational power structures, but also their own intersectional identities. As I said, these networks are currently part of the organizational diversity and inclusion initiatives, which means they're dependent on the organization for resources. If you look at the excerpt I sort of put, so this is like a news clipping, where Rolls-Royce in the UK has cut funding for their inclusion networks as a result of what's happening in the US. So these networks are not only at the mercy of what's happening within their organization, also they're kind of subject to like broader societal power dynamics. But at the same time, not all networks will experience power the same way. Intersectionality scholars sort of tells us that different identities are implicated in different power dynamics. So some might be more privileged, while some are more marginalized. So in this paper, I specifically look at how their intersectional positioning interacts with power structures in the organization and also societally, and how that affects their ability to create change in the organization. And sorry, okay, sorry, now it works. So in order to do that, I take an intersectional approach and I draw on the matrix of domination, which is a framework by an intersectional Black feminist scholar, Patricia Hill Collins. And in this framework, she outlines 4 domains through which power operates. So they're interconnected, but at the same time, disparate domains of power. So the first domain is the structural domain of power, which sort of operates through the wider societal legislation and norms. So an example would be the anti-DEI legislation that's happening in the US and now sort of propagating everywhere, which sort of sets the tone as to how organizations should do DEI globally. And in the UK, more specifically, the Equality Act sets the tone as to what are the protected characteristics and how organizations should do DEI. Then the hegemonic domain of power sort of operates through like dissemination of ideologies. So while the legislation talks about the legal mandates that organizations might abide to, ideologies are more, they sort of shape the practices. For example, initially we used to talk about equality, equal opportunities, affirmative action, but then it shifted to diversity management. And now we are being told to move away from diversity. So these are sort of ideologies which shape organizational practices, and then they're reinforced as the disciplinary domain through organizational policies. How do you do DEI? What is the right, what is wrong? And the interpersonal domain of power is how daily interactions, can create microaggressions, discrimination. So that's how power might operate at the interpersonal level. So this is the framework I use to understand this phenomenon. And my PhD as a whole is a qualitative project. So for this paper specifically, I used 38 interviews out of like the broader sample that I interviewed. And I spoke to different stakeholders who are part of the diversity network. So on the right, the structure you see is the typical governance or network structure in organization, where the top is the senior management, the HR people who sort of control the resources, the budget, the money for the network. And then at the bottom and in the middle, you have the network chairs who, run the day-to-day operations of the network. Some really large organizations have community chairs who do the same thing as the network chairs, but because of the sheer volume of membership, there is like a smaller unit to kind of take care of them. And there are the network members. So there are multiple tiers. And for this paper, I used the first 3 tiers because I thought their narratives would be the most useful to understand, how these power structures operate and how they can navigate it. So the findings were quite interesting. So the structural domain, from my findings, I found operated very much through the UK Equality Act and also the industry norms. So as I said, the Equality Act sort of tells us what are the protected characteristics. And based on that, the organizations decide which network should exist in the organization and get formal status and get resources. So the first code that you see is from a network for women, actually, are specifically part of this network, who don't have children either because of circumstance or because of choice. And this chair talks about that initially when she wanted to create this network, the first question was like, why do you need it? Why do you need to exist? Why can't you be part of the women's network? It's like a women's issue. So why do you need a separate space? And she basically talks that they're an invisible characteristics. That's why the organization doesn't see the need for them to exist. And she sort of parallels this with the LGBT plus network, which she says is very much visible. The organization is very visible and supportive of them. And not because, according to her, because they care about, LGBT plus issues, but because they think it's a marketable network, They can use it to like fund parades and be very visible and portray this happy rhetoric of diversity. And this very much was also, echoed by multiple participants. So according to the participants, the structural domain, the equality legislation is used to legitimize which networks should exist, but also it translates at the hegemonic level, where the whole purpose of these networks is to create a happy diversity rhetoric, which the second court illustrates, where the participant specifically talks about how the BAME network in their organization, so BAME networks is like a network for racial minorities, are seen as performing monkeys, basically. Like the whole point is for them to do diversity and to embrace diversity. So another whole point of it is to be like a marketing gimmick in a way, according to the participants. And networks who don't want to do that get disciplined, so they don't get legitimacy, their resources are taken away. And then it translates at the interpersonal level, where network chairs told me that their career progression was halted because they were too vocal about different issues. So this sort of creates a shallow climate of inclusion, but this is very context specific, because in the third quote, the participant talks about how issues of sexuality regressed in higher education, and this is a result of a broader industry culture where there are a lot of gender critical ideologies propagating in the UK since 2020 at the moment. So while in private sector, you know, the LGBT plus network might have more resources in higher education, it's sort of seen as a taboo topic now. So basically, from the participants' narratives, there seems to be an identity hierarchy, which is very much context specific, where identities which are more marketable tend to be at the top of the hierarchy and get more organizational resources, while identities which are much more contentious as a result of the intersectional identities they represent tend to be at the bottom of the hierarchy. And this has implications directly for the kind of change that they can instigate in the organization. So networks higher up in the hierarchy use this technique called issue selling, where they align their objectives with the business goal to push the organization to implement favorable policies for their members. So an example is one of the chairs of the neurodiversity network was able to implement a neurodiversity insurance because the organization was looking to hire more neurodiverse employees. As a part of the package, she pushed for it and they were able to get this insurance. This is a good thing, but this means that the change will be very incremental and it will be very much limited to what the business sort of wants to happen. And this is only available to like networks higher up in the hierarchy. The ones who are at the bottom of the hierarchy don't have the marketability and the leverage. So what they do is they create like localized change initiatives. So they create microcultures of inclusion where they try to create accommodations within their team. So it creates inclusion at the local level, but it sort of maintains the systemic barriers because they don't have institutional influence. So directly, their sort of position in the hierarchy directly affects their ability to create change in the organization. So what this widely means is that I think based on what's happening now globally, I think it's very important to do DEI as a result of values and social justice, and not because you want to project that you're an inclusive organization, because when you do that, you're much more susceptible, you know, to the DEI backlash, everything that's happening now. So by centering the voices of your employees and incorporating that and adopting a value-driven approach, I think we can be more resilient to this kind of backlash, but at the same time, you know, create more equitable and also transformative organizations, which I think is the ultimate goal, you know, of diversity, equality, inclusion in the first place. So I hope I didn't exceed time. Thank you so much, everyone. And this is my email in case you want to, you know, continue the conversation or have any questions.
That was perfect, Shreya. Thank you so much. It was perfect for the minutes you had. Any reaction from our attendees or the speakers? Yes, Erica. Erica, you are the discussant. You're officially the discussant of
Well, no,
our
this has been so fascinating, this session. And is it Shreya? This is a fantastic paper. I'm really interested in qualitative empirical research. My question for you is, I wonder about the shifting of hierarchies. Like there seems to be a diversity flavor of the day, and that can be highly specific, right? Like a couple of years ago, everybody was celebrating Pride and the corporate brands were all over everything. It's been a much more silent Pride season in the US, for example. In some contexts, like a Balsa or a Black, or I guess in the UK, BAM affinity group can hold a lot of power in some circumstances, but less in others. So I wondered if you had any questions that spoke to how those hierarchies shift and if that happens when they are, I imagine, less in alignment with the corporate goals. And I also wanted to know if you'd, or I'm going to recommend that you look at, this is a legal scholar, a critical race theorist called Derek Bell, and he speaks about interest convergence. And I think some of the interest convergence literature might be helpful since you're already using kind of the power domination framework of scholars from the 90s as he was writing around those times. So yeah, that's my question, but great project. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the recommendation, Erica. Yeah, I did notice that it is quite a shifting thing because one participant, I mean, there were so many codes, so I had to be very selective of what I put, but one participant actually gave a very good example where she talked about how issues of neurodiversity used to be taboo 5 years ago, but now there in the UK, there is this like push that you should hire from the government that try to incorporate like neurodiverse people within the organization. Suddenly, the organization is extremely supportive. They have all these like managers coming into the network meetings and all these resources are being pulled into it. So she could clearly see what led to the shift. So 5 years ago, you can't even, mention neurodiversity. And suddenly, it's not a taboo topic anymore. But issues of childlessness or menopause, even menopause is probably gaining more traction now, slowly in the UK, a little bit, I would say in the UK, but issues of childlessness is still quite a taboo topic, So she's saying that it really very much depends on the societal sort of perception of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, and that very much trickles down into what the organizations think that they should focus their energy on.
You for that. I absolutely love the sort of the positioning because that's a lot of the work that we do with Matteo is really the context and sort of the different layers at play. So you've done a really great job of being able to speak to that. And thank you, Erica, for sharing some more insights there too. If we're okay with that, we'll go on to our next speaker. So as shared, it will be Abigail, who will talk about decolonizing inclusion, reframing DEI through the lived realities of women of color in the global higher education setting. Abigail, are you ready to go?
Yeah.
The floor is all yours.
Can you see my screen?
We're about to. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you very much. Sorry. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my paper. Mostly, I do things from the margins. I work from home due to disability. I'm unable to actually engage with many people. I'm homebound, so I do a bit of my research from my couch and then linking to the outside world. So I'm very much appreciative of this opportunity to engage at a global stage. So I'll be sharing insights from my research on how diversity, equity, and inclusion's effort in the UK higher education often fall short of what they say. And in this case, I'm looking at the plight of non-academic women of color. So this presentation will sort of invite us to rethink inclusion, not just as representation, but maybe as a structural and an epistemic transformation. So I'll just move on to my next slide. Sorry. Right. So yes, as I said before, despite wide adoption of DEI, especially in UK higher education after the George Floyd murder, there was a lot of movement, there was a lot of talk about making sure that DEI is actually meaningful in UK higher education. But figures still show that there is really sort of like, I can say, baby steps into what inclusion is. And this often ends up being more about optics and just symbolic representation. So I think a decolonial praxis lens here is just needed to rethink what we can do when it comes to including, making sure that everyone is involved and represented. So really thinking about it not as a game's number, but the actual taking into consideration of lived experiences of people. So why the UK context matters? UK higher education is globally engaged and shaped by colonial legacies. And while diversity is often legislated, equity remains very much superficial. And these dynamics echo global systems of performative inclusion. And so this work is grounded in decolonial theory, intersectionality, and critical race feminism. So Ahmed's concept of performative diversity here offers key lenses in sort of critiquing institutional practices. So we have Bopo and Meza who provide insight into how structures racialize and gender institutional belonging. So an intersectionality allows us to understand how overlapping identities like race, gender, class, and role shape marginalization within these institutions. And the framework centers on lived experience as epistemology. So it's very important to consider lived experience of individuals. So this is a qualitative study using interviews and reflective field notes. I interviewed 35 women of color in non-academic roles across 10 universities in the UK. This included Russell Group as well as post-1992 universities. And obviously, insider positionality enabled me to gain trust. I only graduated from my PhD last year, so I was part of the research participants, and I use lived experience as an epistemological evidence, not as an anecdote, like what maybe organizations still do. Okay, so moving on. So in terms of key findings, I came up with 3, but obviously it's more because there was quite a lot of stuff that came out of this research. Institutional othering and belonging, linguistic gatekeeping is structural exclusion, and symbolic inclusion without power. So let's look at them one by one. So participants shared that they were treated as outsiders regardless of their tenure or UK birth. So belonging was conditional, often tied to assimilation into whiteness. So there was no whether you just come from abroad or whether you were a British born person, the othering and the sort of foreignness, feeling of foreignness, what I call foreignness, was just across all women who were interviewed. And sort of again, this reflects a very much inclusion, which is championed by surface level diversity and no real cultural or structural transformation. This reflects an inclusion model that contains difference rather than value or integrate. Then on linguistic gatekeeping is structural inclusion. People talked about accent and tone, which were used to mark what is considered as professionalism. So most people who had sort of naturalized, maybe they were from Africa or from Asia or wherever, they were still very much felt they were excluded because of their accents and also tone, which was a marker of being seen as an outsider. And also the notion of professionalism seemed to be very much focused on the standards of whiteness. So if someone speaks a bit louder or uses their hands or kind of bold or bolder than maybe what is expected, then their standard of professionalism was considered as out of the expectation, so affecting maybe their career progression and also their chances of getting into sort of leadership corridors. So this came strongly on women, whether they were from the West Midlands, up north or Manchester or wherever, the accent in certain environments made them very much not ideal for certain positions. And so linguistic inclusion is also a global mechanism of institutional gatekeeping. I remember my examiner who is Italian telling me that when she first came to the UK from Italy, even her accent made her stand out as an outsider. So in this case, whether someone was from Italy but now permanently residing in the UK or working in the UK permanently, because of that accent, if they were marked really like as someone who has who is not part of the cream or the what is considered to be the sort of the ideal candidate for senior leadership. So another thing that came up is symbolic inclusion. So this talked about women being used in sort of visible campaigns. Women of color often being asked to do DEI stuff, expected to be experts in every aspect of DEI. But when it comes to sharing the table or really being there when key decisions are made, they were not welcome. So again, if they criticized anything, they would be seen as resistant. Their views would be seen as resistance, or they were pathologized as difficult, which echoes Ahmed and Meza. So emotional labor really was extracted from most participants who were running around, even being chairs of Black History Month every October, being really put under pressure to produce every year, and also just being that person that if someone feels like they need someone to be representing the Black community or people of color community in interviews, they'll be just the one who will be dragged on, even when they are busy with their day-to-day projects. So this was, again, yes, you are being taken. Yes, people see you being taken all around doing this and the other, but it was really inclusion without power, because at the end of the day, this was not adding any value to their long-term sort of career progression. So in conclusion, this study kind of showed that inclusion without structural change serves to contain rather than transform. It kind of reminded me, what came out of the participants reminded me of what Audre Lorde said about the master's tools not being able to dismantle, a system that is built for that system. So women of color are visible but unheard, and are just expected to adapt without being allowed to lead. And some of the women had been in positions where they could have potentially, because of the time they spent, could have potentially got to senior positions, but because of all the things that I've mentioned and other, they were not able to progress and just stayed in lower grades. So this sort of brings me to what we need: a decolonial framing, and that reviews how inclusion is used to maintain the status quo rather than dismantle it. So yes, if you look at universities' website, they say the same thing: we welcome diversity, underrepresented people, we are this, we know, disabled, and a lot of badges, bronze this, silver that, but at the end of the day, it's still very much maintaining the status quo, keeping those who should be thinking about, change really in place, and never really sort of moving away from maybe how things were. Yes, there's been changes, but they are not really significant changes considering the pressure that we all have faced, for the last years on equality and diversity. So just recommendation from insight to action. So maybe we need to redefine inclusion as structural, not just symbolic. Maybe audit policy impacts, leadership cultures. Look at them, not just demographics, not just what we are getting. At the end of the day, are we getting a badge, extra level on the badge? I remember the days of Antina Swan. My manager was promoting women, white women, and I did ask why, where are the black women? And she just said, well, we'll come to that at some point. So what we need to look at all angles of the protected characteristics, and maybe more. Maybe we have not actually looked at everyone involved. So we need to look at the protected characteristics and how we can sort of redefine some of the things we are doing. Sort of also relational inclusion, sort of centered on trust and voice and ongoing engagement rather than token representation. Most women were sort of years and years of being asked one or two questions on diversity, what to do, but never really seeing themselves being the one that is sort of making those decisions. And also center lived knowledge in governance, establish advisory groups with decision-making powers composed of those with lived experience. And
Abigail, if I may.
yeah,
I'm sorry I'm being the timekeeper on this, and I see
okay.
there's some great questions in the chat that I would hope to allow you to address during this session. So if you don't mind, I will share those questions from the audience.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry, because we're marching in time and we want to keep on track. So one question that came around was the notion of inclusion without power. And notably, Sharina asks that Bhopal talks about those of color in positions of leadership performing white. Was this an aspect that you found in your research also through the feedback from your participants? And another
Definitely.
question, sorry,
Oh,
I'll give
sorry.
you the two, that way you've got them all right off the bat. What would it take for you to achieve true inclusion? Those are the two
Okay.
questions.
Okay, so definitely a symbolic inclusion without power was the key one, because most people feel like they do a lot of diversity. So on top of their jobs, they do a lot of diversity work, not because they want to, but because they are sort of made to do it. Yes, it's good to be, one of the sort of contributors to change, but if on top of your work and you're not paid, it's not recognized, most people feel that it was really something that affected their career progression. So even institutions like the CIPD and HR sort of I think an organization that sort of supports people in age, if you go and say I'm an equality and diversity, you will not get regraded to chartered or associate or whatever, because it's equality and diversity. So people felt they were being dragged down. So yes, symbolically they were involved, but they didn't have the power to make any changes that they felt institutions needed in order to be really inclusive of everyone. And in terms of what I think should be done, again, as I said, just to consider lived experiences and have a proper conversation and listen to voices, because it's no point gathering information. I worked in an organization an institution where data was gathered every quarter on equality and diversity, but it just didn't do anything other than maybe being used to apply for the race charter mark or try to prove that gender is part of the organizational disability. But when you look at the figures, they just didn't mean anything when you look at what should be a sort of an inclusive organization or institution, and considering the local population and all the other factors put in place. So there's still much more about talk and ticking boxes, and also maybe having badges and all of that, but actually not really taking people's struggles and lived experience voices into consideration. So that we need to have that conversation and restructure and redefine what inclusion means.
Thank you for that. That was brilliant. And I know I have a few more questions myself, but I have to be aggressive in terms of keeping our time schedule. Thanks a lot for that presentation, Abigail. And if people want to reach out to you, they can. I think you put out your email up there too, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to continue the conversation after.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
without further ado, we will shift to our next speaker. So it's a duo, if I'm not mistaken. Our next speakers will be Syra, sorry if I mispronounced it, and Ricardo. On racism as a systemic, endemic, and pernicious reflections on an anti-racist critical pedagogic intervention in higher education. So staying within this theme of higher ed. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marcel. And we're actually a trio.
Oh,
So,
a trio, my apologies.
yes, no problem. So, I'm Dr. Sarah Shakir. My great colleagues who are with me today are Ricardo Barker, Associate Professor in Professional Practice, and Dr. Sean Walton, Senior Lecturer in Academic Development. And we're going to divide the time up between us, but we're going to stay within our time. So do bear with us. So our presentation.
Your microphone is a little scratchy, just to let you know.
Oh, apologies. Is it better now?
There seems to be like a lag, like we're getting your echo.
Oh no. Okay, just
Maybe try cutting your video. Maybe it's a bandwidth sort of issue.
Yeah.
Like yours, yeah, that maybe that.
Yeah. Hopefully colleagues can hear me now.
It's better, but still scratchy, but it's better.
Oh, so sorry. So I'm here to basically, well, we are here to talk to you about racism as a systemic, endemic, and pernicious problem, and provide some reflections on the anti-racist critical pedagogic intervention in higher education. So the context, we're a small university in the north of England, and the context and rationale really was that we are striving to become an anti-racist university. And yes, we do have the Race Equality Charter that we achieved some years ago, and we're now striving to work towards the Race Equality Charter Silver. But by no means does that mean that we are actually an anti-racist university. We are addressing and seeking to address extremely wicked problems in our university, as in all higher education institutions. And let's make no mistake that racism is deeply embedded within higher education, and the university is a microcosm of all the other structures across wider society. When we talk about these wicked problems, we're referring to, the awarding gap between white and DAME students, poor retention and continuation, concerns with belonging for students or the lack of belonging, and indeed racial harassment and microaggressions that affect students of colour and also affect staff.
Sorry, Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is, I mean, I can understand what you say, but it's very hard, I think, because there is a scratch in the mic, and then there is also lag, so you repeat your words are repeated twice with this scratchy sound. So I don't know if you want to, maybe we can skip to the next speaker while you try to fix that.
Yeah, sure.
Would this help?
Yeah,
I think it's better because your presentation looks extremely interesting, and we don't want to miss a word. So I think that would be better to have you after with this problem fixed. Maybe you can see with Ricardo and Sean to communicate with them to see whether your mic functions better or not. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Sorry about that. So I will say now it's Marcel Pavel or Julian who comes.
Julian is next.
Sorry?
Julian is next.
Julian, yes, fantastic. So Julian Brain.
All right.
The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully the screen share is working without a glitch. I hope everybody's keeping cool today with the hot weather. So my topic is on operational adaptation in the post-DEI era, and I'll be looking at three main aspects: reframing, messaging, and budget optimization strategies, and also a little bit of business impact. And the angle I'm looking at this from is as an employee network volunteer in addition to my day job. So this is the lens. So I wanted to start with the foreword from one of the resources that I found from an article from the Harvard Business Review around DEI language and the executive order. So the key takeaway here is that it's more of a business decision at this point than a real legal basis for being sued as a company. And certainly there's no legal basis to sue a company just because it expresses support for the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that was just to set the stage. And we'll now dive into the first topic. And to do that, the strategic reframing, I found a very interesting article that focuses on S&P 500 companies, and in particularly their disclosures from the beginning of the year, their 10K disclosures. And they looked at numbers. And so what really stands out here is that 59% of these companies have significantly revised or removed DEI related disclosures. So that's the refocusing on the or the removal of DEI as something that is covered. And the other aspect mitigating this initial number is at least one diversity related disclosure remains, and most likely with a different name. So we'll look at what it means in terms of terminology shift and rebranding from DEI to a variety of different appellations, ranging from belonging in culture, building diverse and inclusive workplace, inclusion for all. You've got a few examples in the colored boxes here, and I found this paper particularly interesting because it looked at about 80% of S&P 500 companies, so it's a significant number of organizations, and they identified the trends that I mentioned earlier, and also the other key learning from this particular piece of research is the use of DEI, the term itself, which plummeted from 2024 when about 90% of the companies were using DEI, again from the S&P 500 company group, down to about a third of them in 2025, again on the basis of those earlier proxy statements. So it's interesting to see the reframing. You might have seen it for those of you who work in organizations or follow the news. There's been a lot on this topic, and it looks like a lot of this is happening to avoid political scrutiny. And DEI, that doesn't remove the fact that DEI might continue under a different name with programs that are adjusted. So that's I suppose the silver lining in this particular situation. Then I wanted to look at communication strategies, and particularly some of the revised messaging approaches that some organizations are facing. So externally, there's an increasingly risk-averse focus on compliant language. That's the removal of DEI, the rebranding that we saw on the previous slide. Whilst internally, companies might be focusing more on psychological safety and ensuring that everybody is welcome. Employee resource groups play a particular role internally to bring employees together and create that safety or that network of support that may no longer be necessarily available publicly. There's also other mechanisms such as inclusion councils with senior leaders in organizations that are providing support not only to the ERG groups but overall to walk the talk on company culture, even if there's been a readjustment in terms of terminology and framing in particular. And other support mechanisms for psychological safety could include events in organizations throughout the year. What this means in terms of operations is additional complexity, where communication on LGBTQ topics, for example, now in some circumstances, the US might be on a par with Middle East countries where LGBTQ communications are not allowed internally in companies for legal reasons. The US might be bundled with Middle East countries, for example, for some of the external communications as well. So there's a real dramatic shift in the way that companies are publicly, at least some companies are supporting DEI. When it comes to budget, a lot of organizations have faced cuts in their DEI programs, not only because the name has changed, but significant cuts in reality. So it could be affecting employee resource groups, although there are ways to put in place low budget events or even events that do not require budgets. This might be achieved through enhanced collaboration with clients, with suppliers, and I think that's where some of the business value really lies, because there's a way to deepen relationships with clients and suppliers, and of course across the organization with employees and colleagues who would be supporting these particular events. And also I wanted to reflect a little bit on frugality. And for some organizations with already limited budgets, there's actually no real change because there's nothing to cut. And that doesn't mean that nothing happens. And that's where frugality, I think, is the mother invention, and it can also help be creative and innovate to put in place events and structures that do support colleagues in organizations in spite of the noise that is taking place outside of organizations. And then finally, when it comes to business impact, a couple items that I wanted to highlight. The first one is the rift in some global organizations, with this headline from one of the resources that I found, where Deloitte had a clear rift between the UK and its US business, in particular when it comes to the use of pronouns, for example, where some organizations, particularly for public contract, requested their employees to remove pronouns. This and the decision in the US doesn't necessarily impact other organizations. So there's here a bit of a cultural rift as well for some organizations. Target, the retailer in the US, around loss of business. There was an article from earlier this year that pointed at around 5.7% on same store sales being down from the previous year. So this could be a blip, but this could also be a general trend. And if you follow the news, you've also seen that Target is seemingly affected by boycott. And then finally, the last example that I found was for Accenture, which was prevented to bid on a £50 million contract with TfL, Transport for London. And as TfL put it, because they no longer met the criteria for diversity that we expect from all our suppliers. So in spite of some of the backlash and walking back on DEI commitments, we've seen this for Pride as well, where there were numerous sponsors who pulled out from Pride parades, for example, in North America, but also in Europe. Some companies are standing strong and still embracing their principles of diversity, which is a bit of a more positive note to finish this. And this brings us to I think I was rather quick on the delivery, but that leaves more time for questions and for the other speakers.
Thank you very much, Julian. It was absolutely amazing. I think the operative part is where it's worth considering, especially because DEI is a matter of practice, essentially, of companies or corporate practices. So I would be glad to leave the floor to questions from the audience or from the other speakers.
So I have a question. Julian, I'm not sure if you, hi, everyone. I was off camera, just saving some bandwidth for myself. I am not sure if you've had a chance to consider the, I think it was Catalyst and the Meltzer Center at NYU put out a survey results a couple of weeks ago, where they had contacted, I think, 2,500 legal leaders and C-suite leaders of U.S. companies, asking them how they are responding in the current context. And they talk about three different, I don't know if you want to call them strategies, but three different reactions. What they call flight, fight, and finesse. Flight means companies that are retreating, quite starkly. Fight means companies that are not changing anything or very vocally affirming their commitment. And finesse was the largest category. I think 80+% of companies suggested that they were finessing, which includes some of the tactics that you're talking about in terms of shifting language, maybe being quieter about their work, so not speaking as publicly, but actually continuing to do some of the work internally. And so I think there is this tension, and I think there is this conversation that needs to be had about what is actually smart risk mitigation that allows a company to continue to pursue its principles. So all changes in practice are not necessarily a retreat. And I did just want to observe that Target is a very particular context because a lot of their commitments, and so Marcel and Matteo, you've talked about context quite a lot. Target's initial commitments and very strong commitments were taken in the context of the murder of George Floyd. And they are, I believe, anchored in that community. And so their very quick retreat, or their very quick shift, I think, it really struck at as their initial commitment having been purely performative. So they are getting a lot more backlash than other companies might, because it really does seem like a 180 in terms of their espoused values.
Yeah, thanks, Felicia, for sharing the details about the report. I wasn't aware of it, but I'll certainly look into it. And I think you make a strong point around the performative aspect of some organizations when it comes to DEI. So it's also a bit of a readjustment at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Felicia. One thing that one question I might have is more a comment than a question, is that how intense is the connection between non-discrimination, like the law, and DEI practices? I think that's an important question because the shift in the narrative, the legal narrative, was dramatic. But the point is how much this shift in the legal narrative because of this executive order is really a shift in DEI practice. So does it modify our perception of social justice or social justice needs? Does it modify our inclusion needs? Does it modify our diversity? So I think these are super important questions, and to see how companies change after this policy shift is a way to frame the conversation about how much do we depend, how much does DEI depend on the legal context. Also, if we take Europe, for example, in Europe we have legal constraints about that we can report under the umbrella of DEI, right? So, for example, we have compulsory board members, compulsory female board members. We also have reporting duties on DEI initiatives, and these are mandatory requirements. So, for example, I was talking about about this with a friend of mine who is general counsel of a big French company, and this we commented about the policy shift, and then I said, yeah, but then what we do in Europe, we have all these requirements, and he said, no, this is the law. So it's there that I perceived a little bit the difference between practicing DEI and obeying anti-discrimination law. I think DEI is not so much now about non-discriminating, is more about taking actions to include. I'm not very clear because I don't have I didn't reason about this longer enough, but I think the point is, how do we connect DEI with anti-discrimination law, and if anti-discrimination laws change or become more intrusive in corporate matters, how this impact DEI? I don't know. This is not a question specifically for you, Julian, but it might be a food for thought, because what you said is really about this.
Yeah, and that would certainly make for an interesting research topic, for sure.
Yeah, fantastic, Felicia. And also Tino promoted, like, yeah, sorry, just showed the book Disclosure Land. So thank you, Tino, for this, for signaling this book. I think is something we all want to look into. So the next speaker, thank you, Julian. So the next speaker would be Pavel Ovseiko. Sorry if I misspelled the name. And then we will pass again the floor to Syra and Ricardo and Sean. Yes.
Hello, everyone. Can you see these slides well? Wonderful. I would like to share with you some insights into the impact pathways and effectiveness of Athena Swan framework. It was established in the UK and now is widely used in higher education and research pretty much throughout the world. And I will speak as a researcher who does research on EDI, and I'm also deputy chair of the Athena Swan Governance Committee at Advance HE, the UK national organization that runs Athena Swan. I'm not remunerated for this role, so I don't believe that there is a substantive conflict of interest here. And I'm not trying to sell you the framework, but rather provide insights in what can be achieved and what can be measured if there is a national or international framework adopted in many countries. And it has particular relevance to the efforts of Horizon Europe to require research institutions who apply for funding from the European Commission to provide a gender equality action plan. So for you who don't know, Athena Swan was established in the UK as a small charity, but by women scientists back in 2005. And it's based on several key principles and ideas, which are quite different from what they use in Europe. So first of all, you need to join the charter and sign up to the principles of the charter. Then you need to establish a self-assessment team to collect data, analyze it, and develop your action plan. using a common framework for developing and implementing action plans. So all institutions and departments use the same framework in the UK and in countries that follow Athena Swan. Importantly, there are two types of action plans because UK institutions are very, very decentralized. The main action plans are actually at the level of departments, and these type of action plans, they look at hiring decisions, retention, organizational culture, promotion, and so on. And also there are university or research institute level action plans, and they look at general institution-wide policies. So that's a huge difference, not just university action plans, but also departmental action plans where they are operationalized at the coalface, so to speak, where hiring and promotion and employment decisions are made. Another important thing is that Athena Swan is a peer review framework. When you develop your action plan, you submit it to a panel of peer reviewers from institutions or departments like you. For example, if you're a department of chemistry, then it's very likely that your application will be reviewed by people from chemistry departments. If you're a business school, then academics and DEI practitioners from other business schools would review your applications. And there are three types of awards. A bronze award is for establishing a baseline and developing an evidence-based action plan. It doesn't need to show any change. It's just to develop, it's just to understand what's going on and propose an action plan. Then there are silver awards where you need to demonstrate a successful implementation with some impact, and only gold awards are for those departments and institutions who can demonstrate significant impact on gender equity, i.e. they need to show hard numbers that they have improved gender equity. Athena Swan was a rather small initiative, but when in 2011, the UK National Institute for Health Research made a requirement for universities applying for research funding to show at least an Athena Swan Silver Award, i.e. that they've done something to improve gender equality, the uptake of Athena Swan among these biomedical, among universities who participated in this scheme has increased tenfold. And this was a watershed moment. After that, the framework was also adopted in Ireland, in Canada, in the United States, and also there are pilots in India, in Brazil, and in Cyprus. So it's a truly international or global framework. But because it's a peer review framework, each country that operates it has its own national peer review panel and has made changes to the original framework. So when we looked at the impact pathways of Athena Swan and effectiveness, we analyzed 20 randomly selected action plans with demonstrated impact, i.e. at silver and gold level. And because although the framework is the same, action plans use different actions, different measures of success. It is impossible to use quantitative analysis to summarize impact in any meaningful way. So we did a qualitative analysis, and in doing so, we've identified 9 major impact pathways, and if you look at this diagram, the larger the area, the higher the percentage of applications that showed success in this area. So this quantitative indicator can be used as a proxy for effectiveness, assuming that the more institutions use this kind of actions, the more effective they are. But again, there is no way to prove how effective these actions or interventions and how they compare to other similar actions, which one is more effective. So we know for sure, and it's been peer-reviewed based on data, that institutions and departments that participate in Athena Swan showed improved gender representation across career pipeline, especially improved gender representation in senior roles. They introduced flexible and family-friendly working practices. They showed improved gender equity in career development and advancement. They also show reduced gender segregation of professional and technical staff across different job families, improved gender balance on committees, reduced gender pay gap, reduced bullying and harassment, and reduced gender segregation among students and disciplines. Due to time restrictions, I'll show you how one of this particular area can be analyzed in terms of precise impact pathways. So when we looked at the outcomes and actions associated with improved gender representation in senior roles, we found that direct recruitment of female candidates is actually the most frequently used type of action, as opposed to promoting your own staff or even investing in career development and then promoting your own staff. So it's pretty much the more money you have, the better candidates you can recruit from other universities. It's a bit disheartening. At the same time, a lot of institutions are investing in the promotion of their own staff and creating opportunities for career development. Just to show you an example of what kind of outcomes we were looking at, and I'll just name a few for the sake of brevity. An increase in female senior academic applicants, success rates at interview and appointments, improved differential between the percentage of females applying for and offered jobs, increase of senior female academics, both headcount and full-time equivalent, reduced gender gap in senior academic roles, improved senior gender representation, and so on. And these are type of actions associated with these outcomes: personal development review, support offered to female candidates to apply to leadership development programs, mentoring, especially CV mentoring, visible female leadership and role models, and so on. I'll skip this slide with a case study. One important theoretical conclusion that we reached is that actually Athena Swan action plans conform to the key considerations of complexity. So we found multiple actions and areas of intervention with a focus on the complex system of action planning embedded in local dynamics. We saw the non-linearity of interventions and constantly changing and emerging conditions. Actions were changed from the beginning of the action plan till the end. And most importantly, impact is shown in terms of contribution to change, improved conditions to foster change, and increased probability that change can occur. So the main theoretical conclusion from this is that actually to enable effective development and evaluation of gender equality action plans, we need to acknowledge and operationalize complexity as a frame of reference. And this is all from me. There are some papers where we published some of this research, which you can consult if you find it useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pavel. It was perfectly on time. So any reaction, comment, question? Okay. So I think there is
a question in the chat.
Yoko, yes. Marcel, you want to, maybe Pavel, you want to read directly?
There's two questions. So one is around the notion of, if Michael raises the question around that there's generally a lot of discussions around diversity, inclusion, and equality, but equity feels more elusive. Does equity receive less attention in research and practice, or is it that a misconception? And how do we better assess equity in academia, where faculty should ideally have fair access to support, promotions, opportunities? So I think in reference to the Athena Swan Action Plan. A second question that you also received were around how Athena Swan responding to the current anti-DEI narratives. So some of the countries that were cited are these areas where we're seeing a lot of backlash around diversity. And are some institutions resisting to Athena Swan given the current context?
As a member of the Athena Swan Governance Committee, I can give you a very good answer to the last question about changes in membership. The growth has slowed down significantly, but those institutions that have adopted Athena Swan continue with Athena Swan. And the main reason, because Athena Swan is about creating conditions for change, mainly in terms of creating better working conditions, creating conditions for career development and promotion for all staff. Only a small proportion of Athena Swan initiatives focus on hiring more women or mentorship schemes specifically for women. It's about all staff, and the main value in doing this for universities is actually to providing some sort of corporate structure for career development for its research and teaching staff, because before Athena Swan, it was universities were far, far away from the corporate world where there are clear rules, procedures, and pathways. It's very unregulated and nobody thought about it before. So because there is a huge value, not necessarily or directly in gender equity, but in creating equitable opportunities for everyone, universities continue with Athena Swan, but growth in the number of departments and institutions that was stratospheric after it was linked to funding has stopped. It's growing very, very slowly, but it's not declining either. And another question.
There was more the question around the language of equity in research, and specifically around faculty, in terms of having access to support, promotions, and opportunities. And of course, for people that may not be as comfortable with equity, equality, I know I often get sort of these types of questions when we teach about DEI in the classroom, sort of understanding the differences between those terms.
So many Athena Swan self-assessment teams have been rebranded to equality, diversity, and inclusion teams. And many, if not all, Athena Swan applications try to address especially racial equity, also disability, sexual orientation, and other individual characteristics, which are considered as cross-sectional characteristics of gender and other diversity characteristics. So from this point of view, Athena Swan, I think, is making huge inroads in the UK. I would compare it a little bit with welfare state. The original model of UK, especially research-intensive institutions, is like academic capitalism. You take postdocs, you don't give them anything. They work for whatever X years. They don't get their next grant. You don't care. But thanks to Athena Swan, universities have started thinking about opportunities for postdocs, opportunities for teaching staff to develop and grow their careers in the university, but also provide information on alternative career pathways. I hope I have answered your question.
I thank you for all that, and I know I think you shared your email also. So again, I think I can invite our audience to be able to reach out. Yeah.
Just Google my name, and I'll be delighted to answer all your questions.
Wonderful. And I guess we can circle back to our last team of presenters, Sarah, Ricardo, and Sean. My apologies for having forgotten you the first time around.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully people can hear me okay now and see me as well. So my great colleague Ricardo is going to be sharing the presentation. So I'll just, yeah, brilliant. Okay, so that's coming up now. And so sorry about earlier on. So I'm conscious of time and we're the last group. But you know, we're going to try and keep within our specific 12-minute allocation. So if people can bear with us until the end, we'd really appreciate it. So our presentation, I'm Dr. Cyrus Shakir. My great colleague, Dr. Sean Walton, and Ricardo Barker, Associate Professor in Professional Practice. And we're all from Leeds Trinity University. If you can go to the next slide, please, Rick. So a bit of context around our presentation where we're discussing this pernicious problem of addressing racism through a pedagogical intervention, which is rooted in anti-racism. And essentially, this intervention is a training workshop called Retention and the Aftermath Debate. And Retention is the title of a film, which my great colleague Rick will talk to you in just a moment. But this whole intervention was really around trying to address these long-standing wicked problems that we see in higher education. And we're talking about wicked problems, whether it's the ethnicity degree awarding gap for students, whether it's poor retention and continuation, you know, significant concerns around belonging or lack of belonging, and also racial harassment, racial discrimination and microaggressions that affect students up and down the country across the higher education sector. And let's be real about this. These issues also affect staff of colour, whether it be poor representation of staff from BAME backgrounds, poor opportunities for promotion or lack of promotion, retention. Many staff leave the higher education environment due to racial discrimination, and of course the ethnicity pay gap as well. So all of these long-standing wicked problems require a different and creative solution. So we're trying to build an anti-racist university. We do have the Race Equality Charter Bronze. I've just recently submitted the Race Equality Charter Silver application for the university a few weeks ago. And this training workshop is embedded as core training for both our staff and students at the university for the last 5 years. And there was a need for training when we talk about becoming anti-racist to move beyond this typical tokenistic idea of unconscious bias, which we don't work with that term and we don't use that term. So the training is really to provide a safe space to promote open discussion and dialogue, to learn and listen to people's experiences. And the training is grounded in a number of creative outputs, one of which is the film, Retention, and it's grounded in both lived experience and research data. and we follow a specific theoretical frameworks, which my great colleague Sean will also talk to you in just a moment. So at the end of the training, we want our staff and our student body, our community, to basically move to action, to make some commitments and to do something about tackling these wicked issues at university. So I'll hand over to Sean and for the next slide.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Okay, so this is the three paradigms or three schools of thought that the retention project is based on. Now, I should say a little bit about the context of these paradigms. So when we started the retention project, we were acutely aware that DEI or EDI initiatives, as they're called in the UK, are generally speaking quite useless, particularly around race and racism. So Sarah's mentioned the awarding gap. We've known about the awarding gap in higher education for many years now. You know, the first big study into that goes back to 2007, what was then the DFES, the Department for Education and Skills, what's known as the Broecki and Nichols report, which showed that there was an enormous gap between the number of first and 2-1s awarded to white students and those awarded to students of colour. And we know that that remains the case when other variables are accounted for. So whether or not you're a first-time entrant to higher education, what your prior attainment is, the socioeconomic status of your family, etc., etc. We also know, drawing on critical theory, that there's such a thing as repressive tolerance. And that's particularly true of anti-racist interventions. So if these things are done badly, they just serve to make the problem worse. Okay, they just underscore what's perceived as the white stream normal Eurocentric state of affairs. Right, everything else just seems like, oh yeah, here's a bit of a weird inclusive addition, right? So we wanted to avoid these things. So we went right back to basics. We went to critical radical traditions, and we mean radical in the true sense of the word. So if you look at the etymology of that word, to be radical is to grasp a problem at the root. So we draw on these three things: critical race theory, useful for many reasons, but for the following reason: it underscores racism as being ever present, existing on the micro, meso, or macro level. So it's the normal state of affairs. The critical race theorists sometimes use that phrase, white supremacy, right? There is just an all-pervasive whiteness in the institution. We draw on scholars like Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Nicola Rowlock, Dave Gilbourne in the UK. But we go back to a more radical tradition too. We draw on the Black radical tradition. So scholars like Cedric Robinson, the latest and still the only professor of Black studies in the UK, Kehinde Andrews, who suggests that we need to look at the history and the socio-economic structures of the society that we live in, and the kind of institutions that those structures have given birth to. We also bring in Marxist and neo-Marxist thought. In particular, racism's intrinsically linked to economic and socio-political superstructures. Anti-racist practice should recognize this. Traditionally, or rather contemporaneously in the literature, these schools are often presented, and indeed have often been counter to each other, have often been at odds. So, critical race theory has been criticized, for example, for having no program. It's a diagnosis with no medicine, if you like. Marxist thought has been criticized for being overtly white. So Marxism is a white formation. Black radical politics comes under attack pretty much from the whole critical field. But rather than sort of focus on the disagreements, we've moved forward with the project where these three schools of thought intersect and have started to converge. And with that, I'll pass over to my colleague, Rick.
Hi there. Okay, I'll try and keep it really brief. 2017, I was presented with awarding gap data that was highlighting embedded biases within the teaching and how that was impacting our students. And our university had tried over the years to address their awarding gaps and the discrepancies, but they were finding it increasingly difficult. And when I saw this data, I was taken by it. I thought it was incredibly powerful. and quite disturbing. But what I also thought was quite interesting was that the data itself, how that was presented, was quite difficult to discern. And particularly for students, it was really difficult for them to access. And given that this was something that related specifically to them and then to their parents and to the wider society, it was quite alienating. So it kind of inspired me to think about, well, how else could this be presented? So I was interested in, because my background is in filmmaking, I wanted to create a drama, something that could help translate that data into something that would be accessible to other people through storytelling. So it's like a way of connecting the heart, connecting the head of the data with the heart of empathy, making it relatable. So the project, I worked with a small group of students initially, thinking that the whole thing would be done in 6 weeks. It took 18 months in total, because we started looking at experiences, anecdotal experiences and testimonies from a student experience on campus. Then we broadened it out around the city, to the region, and then nationally. Getting information and then also empowering the students to find ways of getting the using digital technology to access information and accessing their research, which ultimately resulted in the film, which tackled a number of themes. So our main protagonist is Tupelo. And one of the main themes that came out throughout all of the research was that old-fashioned form of racism, of name calling and daubing graffiti on buildings and all of that, things had moved on from there. This was quite an invisible form of bias, and students were feeling that they didn't feel included. This is Black students, Black and Asian students, didn't feel included within the fabric of the university and had an issue of belonging. So it manifested in forms of microaggressions. Particularly one thing which I think was touched upon earlier on was about the mispronunciation of names, and how you having to endure that when you're a young person, having your name mispronounced again and again and again, and not having the feeling that you've got the power to actually readdress that without there being some kind of kickback. That was a thing. Also, that professional, not just academic members of staff, but other non-academics in the university working in canteen or security, how they could make students feel as though they don't belong, really, and they don't feel as though they're part of the fabric of it. So basically, it was all pointing to unconscious bias. Another thing was that academics, it was like within the institute, within the academy and institutions, academics saw themselves as though they were beyond prejudice and beyond forms of racism. How could they be racist? Because they're intellectual and academic and stuff. So the problem couldn't be with them. It had to be with the students, and particularly in a university that's widening participation, the students had to be the problem. So it was a way of making a piece that could speak of the students' experience, but make it kind of accessible to the academics, to my peers. Originally, it was a no-budget film that was made outside of university hours. The students completely engaged with it, and we made this piece purely to show within our university, but through its success, we now take it to universities across the country. We've been told, because we're continually collecting data about the responses towards the film, that it's uncomfortable viewing, because it talks about and expresses the lived experience of a particular character that's very authentic, and it kind of does make people, it forces them to empathize with that perspective, and it looks at varying different types of perspectives that students and staff will hold on racism within an institution. And on that I'll hand back to Syra.
Thank you, Rick. So I think we've only got 1 minute left, so if we could just have the last slide, Rick, and I'll wrap up. So essentially, our concluding reflections are that, you know, there's this need for consistent review of our actions, and there's a lot of self-work here that needs to be done. There's a lot of internal reflection that needs to take place, and we need to create those spaces, which we've done through our workshops, to have those brave conversations, and it needs to be continual. There's also this whole thing around the top-down and bottom-up approach to becoming anti-racist if we're building this anti-racist university. Yes, we do have supportive leadership who are driving forward this agenda, but each of us have individual agency and capacity and can do things within our sphere of influence. So we mustn't underestimate the power of individuals as well as a collective. And then just also that we're operating, and we're very conscious that we're operating within the bounds of white supremacy and what Kai Hindi Andrews refers to as a psychosis of whiteness, which presents a number of challenges in the HE environment. But this work is absolutely necessary. It's urgent within the context of what's happening here, everywhere across the world, and it also provides some revolutionary promise. So as Malcolm X would say, it's by any means necessary. And you can check out our forthcoming publication, which will be available in the next few weeks in Sage Equity and Education Society. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing that. We've already got one first easy question. Where can we find the film? As Erica put down in the chat.
Get in touch, please. Do, yeah, get in touch with us, and we're more than happy to share the film and the toolkit that we've got, and build collaborations with like-minded activists.
Excellent. Are there any questions from the audience? I'm looking at the chat function at the same time. Nothing. I especially love your point about making also the individual aspect, like the individual as a catalyst or the power that the individual can bring. Same, I did a series of conversations last week around diversity in the tech environment, and we don't spend enough time on the individual. We talk about the collectives, and the socio-legal standards that are at play, but we don't spend the time on the individual also in terms of that actor. So it's very nice to hear that perspective come through in this research. Matteo?
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really great. I took a lot of notes, and to be frank, it was a great session. Very very thoughtful. A lot of issues, problems, but also a lot of recommendations and solutions on how to solve them. So I feel extremely grateful to each of you for the commitment you put into this 4 hours project, because we know Felicia and Erica were speakers last week, and they took the time to be here with us this evening as well. So it was great to have you. I probably cannot express my gratitude so much right now, because my brain is kind of exploding with all these ideas and possible research trajectories, willingness to collaborate with all of you on the amazing things you do. So thank you so much again. You can bet we'll stay in touch. And if you feel that Marcel and I can help you with anything, also, bringing the HEC community with this picture, please do not hesitate to contact us.
As I shared at the onset, this is part also of the work that we do through the EDI forum that's led by Cambridge Judge Business School. And so we thank all of our schools and alliances that are helping bring this topic and keep giving it light across the board. My little takeaway is really the language around lived experiences and hearing those lived experiences. Many of you spoke of that, and sort of that power of connection and communications, really using the lived experiences to be able to connect, to make the messages and the impacts or changes sought more powerful. So a huge thank you to all of you for taking the time and sharing your research and insights.
Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves and stay safe. And we'll talk soon.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
A big round of applause
Thanks a
for
lot.
Marcel and Matteo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.